my love. If anyone ever made you feel like you were difficult to love, like your heart asked for too much, or your soul was too heavy to carry, I need you to hear this tonight. You were never hard to love. You were simply standing in front of people who never learned how to understand you, who mistook your depth for distance, your honesty for intensity, your love for something overwhelming. But the truth is, you were never the problem. You were just a beautiful language, spoken in a world that never took the time to listen. My love. Somewhere along the way, someone made you believe that loving you was difficult. Maybe it wasn't said directly, maybe it came in silence, in distance, in the way their eyes stopped meeting yours the same way they once did. Maybe it came in the form of patience that slowly turned into frustration, or warmth that quietly became cold, and without even realizing it, you started questioning yourself. You started wondering if your heart was too loud, if your feelings were too deep, if the way you loved asked for more than anyone could ever give. But listen to me carefully. You were never hard to love. You were simply honest in a world that survives on pretending. You felt things fully, without filters, without holding back pieces of yourself just to be accepted. And people who only know how to love halfway, they get scared of that. Not because there's something wrong with you, but because your depth reminds them of everything they're not ready to face within themselves. Your love wasn't heavy, it was real, and real things have weight to people who are used to carrying nothing at all. You gave your heart in a way that didn't come with conditions. You didn't love carefully. You loved completely, and that kind of love can feel overwhelming to someone who's only ever learned to keep things surface level. They might have looked at you and thought you were asking for too much, when all you were really asking for was honesty, presence, and a connection that didn't disappear when things got uncomfortable. You weren't asking for perfection. You were asking for truth. And truth scares people, so instead of trying to understand you, they labeled you. They called you complicated. They said you were too emotional, too sensitive, too intense. But what they really meant was, they didn't know how to meet you where you were. They didn't know how to stand in front of something real without running away from it. It was never about you being difficult. It was about them being unprepared. You see, people will always try to simplify what they don't understand. It's easier to say, you're too much than to admit, I don't know how to love you the way you deserve. It's easier to step back than to step up. And somewhere in that space between who you are and what they couldn't handle, you started shrinking. You started holding back your thoughts, softening your words, dimming parts of yourself, just to make things easier for them. But love was never supposed to make you smaller. You were never meant to be reduced into something more convenient. Your depth wasn't something that needed to be controlled or adjusted. It was something that needed to be understood, and the right kind of understanding doesn't feel like pressure. It feels like peace. It doesn't ask you to change who you are. It learns who you are. Think about that for a moment. All those times you stayed quiet when you had so much to say. All those nights you overthought your own feelings, wondering if you were overreacting. All those moments you apologized for things that were never wrong in the first place. That wasn't you being hard to love. That was you trying to survive in a place where your love wasn't being recognized. You tried to translate yourself into something they could understand. You tried to make your heart easier to hold. But love doesn't work like that. You can't rewrite your soul, just so someone else doesn't have to put in the effort to read it. And the more you tried, the more lost you became within yourself, because deep down, you always knew. You knew that the way you loved was rare. You knew that your heart carried something real, but when that reality kept being misunderstood, it started to feel like a burden instead of a gift. And that's what hurt the most. Not that they couldn't love you, but that they made you feel like you were the reason why. You weren't. You were never the problem. The problem was that you gave your love to people who only knew how to receive parts of it. People who wanted the comfort of your presence, but not the responsibility of your depth. People who liked how you made them feel, but didn't want to understand what it took for you to feel the same way. And love, real love, doesn't work like that. Real love doesn't pick and choose which parts of you it wants to accept. It doesn't celebrate your light and reject your darkness. It doesn't ask you to be easier, quieter, less. Real love meets you fully. It listens when you speak, even when your words are hard to understand at first. It stays, even when things become complicated. It tries. Not perfectly, but honestly. And you deserved that kind of effort. You deserved someone who didn't see your emotions as something to fix, but something to feel with you. Someone who didn't back away when you opened up, but leaned closer. Someone who didn't call your love overwhelming, but recognized it as something rare. Something worth holding on to. But instead, you were met with confusion. With distance. With people who couldn't see the beauty in the way you loved because they were too busy trying to make it fit into something simpler. And love was never meant to be simple. It's meant to be deep. It's meant to be layered. It's meant to challenge you, change you, and reveal parts of you that you didn't even know existed. And you understood that. You didn't run from it. You embraced it. You felt everything, even when it hurt. That's not weakness. That's strength. It takes courage to love the way you do. To stay open in a world that constantly gives you reasons to close yourself off. To keep believing in connection, even after being misunderstood again and again. That's not something everyone can do. And maybe that's why they couldn't understand you. Because understanding you requires depth. It requires patience. It requires a willingness to go beyond the surface and actually see what's underneath. And not everyone is ready for that. Not everyone wants that. But that doesn't mean you're too much, it just means you were giving your heart to the wrong hands. Hands that didn't know how to hold something so real, without dropping it. Hearts that weren't ready to match the way you love. Minds that were too closed to understand something that couldn't be explained in simple terms. You were never hard to love. You were just waiting to be understood, and being understood, truly understood, is one of the rarest forms of love that exists. It's not about agreeing on everything. It's not about never having misunderstandings. It's about trying. It's about choosing to learn each other, even when it's not easy. It's about staying curious about someone's heart, instead of assuming you already know it. You needed that. You deserved that. But instead, you were placed in situations where your love was questioned, where your intentions were misunderstood, where your feelings were dismissed. And slowly, it made you question yourself. It made you wonder if maybe they were right, if maybe you were too intense, too emotional, too much. But you weren't. You were just real in places that only accepted half-truths. You were honest in spaces that preferred silence. You were open in a world that often hides behind walls. And that kind of authenticity, it doesn't always get appreciated by the wrong people, but the right people, they don't get overwhelmed by it, they get drawn to it, they don't ask you to be less. They ask you to be more of who you already are. They don't misunderstand your love, they recognize it, they see you. Not just the parts you show easily, but the parts you struggle to express. The parts that take time to unfold. The parts that require patience and care. And when someone truly sees you like that, you won't feel like you're hard to love anymore. You'll feel like you've finally been found. Because love was never about changing yourself to fit someone else's understanding. It was about finding someone who takes the time to understand you as you are. And until that happens, it's easy to feel lost. It's easy to think that maybe you're the reason things didn't work out, that maybe if you were a little less emotional, a little less expressive, a little less deep, things would have been different, but then you wouldn't be you. And the truth is, you were never meant to be loved for a smaller version of yourself. You were meant to be loved for all of it, for the way you care deeply, for the way you think, feel, express, and connect, for the way your heart doesn't settle for anything that isn't real. That's not something to fix, that's something to protect. Because one day, someone will come into your life who doesn't see your depth as something confusing, but something beautiful. Someone who doesn't get overwhelmed by your love, but feels at home in it. Someone who doesn't misunderstand you, but takes the time to understand even the parts you can't fully explain. And when that happens, everything that once made you feel like you were hard to love will start to make sense. Because it was never about you being too much. It was always about them not being enough to understand what you carried within your heart. They didn't misunderstand your love by accident. That's the part that hurts the most when you finally allow yourself to see it clearly. My love. Misunderstanding can be innocent at first. It can come from confusion, from differences, from not knowing how someone else feels or expresses themselves. But what you went through, that wasn't just confusion that tried to become clarity. It was confusion that stayed comfortable. It was distance that never tried to close the gap. It was someone standing in front of your heart and choosing not to step closer, because when someone truly wants to understand you, they ask, they listen, they stay, even when it's not easy. They don't just hear your words, they try to feel what's behind them. And you gave them chances to do that. You opened up in ways that weren't easy for you. You explained yourself, sometimes more than once, sometimes more than you should have had to. You gave them pieces of your heart, hoping they would hold them gently, hoping they would finally see you the way you were meant to be seen. But they didn't, not because they couldn't, but because they didn't try hard enough. And that truth can feel heavy. Because it forces you to let go of the excuse that maybe they just didn't know better. It makes you face something deeper. That they had opportunities to understand you, and they chose not to take them. They had moments where they could have leaned in, but they leaned away instead. They saw your emotions, your depth, your honesty, and instead of getting closer, they stepped back and called it too much. But think about it. How can something be too much for someone who truly cares? When you care about someone, you don't get overwhelmed by their heart. You become curious about it. You don't shut down when they express themselves. You try to meet them halfway. You don't make them feel like a problem. You try to solve the distance between you and them. That effort was missing, and you felt it, even when you didn't want to admit it. You felt it in the way they would change the subject when things got too real. In the way they would dismiss your feelings instead of understanding them. In the way they would label your love instead of learning it. You kept hoping that one day, something would shift. That they would finally see you. That they would realize what they had in front of them and choose to understand it, instead of avoiding it. But real understanding doesn't come from realization alone. It comes from effort. From intention, from a willingness to step into someone else's world and say, I don't fully get you yet. But I want to. You were waiting for that. You were waiting for them to want you enough to understand you, but wanting someone and understanding someone are not the same thing. And sometimes, people want the comfort you give them without wanting the responsibility of truly knowing you. They enjoy the warmth of your presence, the way you care, the way you love. But they don't want to do the deeper work that comes with holding a heart like yours. And that's where the imbalance begins, because you were giving from a place of depth. And they were receiving from a place of convenience. You were trying to build something real. And they were trying to keep things easy, and when those two intentions meet, someone always ends up feeling misunderstood. You tried to close that gap. You tried to make things easier for them. You adjusted your tone, your expectations, your expressions. You held back when you wanted to speak. You simplified your emotions so they wouldn't feel overwhelmed. You even questioned yourself, wondering if maybe you were asking for too much, if maybe your way of loving was too intense for anyone to handle. But the truth is, you were never asking for too much. You were asking the wrong person, because the right person doesn't see your depth as a burden. They don't see your love as something they have to survive. They don't misunderstand you over and over again without trying to change that. They don't sit in comfort while you sit in confusion. The right person tries even when it's difficult. Even when it takes time. Even when they don't get it right the first time. They try again. That's the difference. You weren't asking for perfection. You were asking for effort. For consistency. For someone who wouldn't just accept your love, but would take the time to understand it. But instead, you were left in a space where you had to keep explaining yourself. Keep proving your intentions. Keep translating your heart into something easier to digest. And slowly, that started to exhaust you. Because love shouldn't feel like you're constantly defending who you are. It shouldn't feel like you have to convince someone that your feelings are valid. It shouldn't feel like you're speaking a language that no one is willing to learn. And yet, you stayed because you believed in them. Because you saw something in them that made you think they were capable of understanding you. Even if they hadn't shown it yet. You held on to potential. You held on to hope. You told yourself that maybe they just needed time. That maybe one day they would finally see you clearly. But time doesn't create understanding. Effort does. And effort was something they kept giving halfway, and halfway love always leaves someone feeling unseen. You weren't unseen because you were invisible. You were unseen because they weren't really looking. There's a difference. Someone can be right in front of you, showing you exactly who they are, and still be misunderstood by someone who isn't paying attention. And you showed them everything, not all at once, but piece by piece, in moments of vulnerability, in conversations that mattered, in the way you cared and stayed and tried. You gave them everything they needed to understand you, they just didn't use it. And that realization, it changes something inside you. It shifts the way you see the past. It helps you understand that it wasn't about you being too complicated or too emotional or too much. It was about them not meeting you where you were. It was about them choosing comfort over connection, ease over effort, surface over depth, and that choice. It had nothing to do with your worth. It had everything to do with their limitations, because not everyone is capable of understanding a heart that loves deeply. Not everyone is ready to hold something real without trying to reshape it into something easier. And you were never meant to be easy. You were meant to be understood. And understanding you requires presence. It requires patience. It requires someone who doesn't run when things get real, but stays and listens and learns. That's what was missing. Not your value, not your love, not your ability to be cared for, just the right person who was willing to understand what you were offering. Because when someone truly wants to understand you, they don't make you feel like a puzzle that's too complicated to solve. They don't walk away when things require more than surface level effort. They don't leave you questioning your own heart. They sit with you. They ask questions. They try again, and again, and again, until your heart no longer feels like something that needs to be explained, but something that is finally seen. And that's when love stops feeling like confusion and starts feeling like peace. The right heart doesn't fix you. That's something you were made to believe for a long time. My love, somewhere in your journey, you started thinking that love was supposed to repair you, that the right person would come into your life and somehow fill every empty space, quiet every fear, and make every broken piece of you feel whole again. Maybe it wasn't something you said out loud, but it was something you felt, because of everything you went through. Everything that left you questioning yourself. It became easy to believe that you needed someone to come and make things right. But love was never meant to fix you, because you were never broken. You were hurt. Yes, you were misunderstood, often. You were placed in situations where your heart wasn't seen the way it deserved to be seen, and those experiences left marks on you. They made you doubt your worth. They made you question your love. They made you wonder if something inside you needed to be changed in order to be fully accepted. But those marks, they were never signs of something being wrong with you. They were reminders of where you gave your love to people who didn't know how to hold it. And when the right heart comes into your life, it doesn't look at those parts of you and think, this needs to be fixed. It looks at you and understands, this needs to be seen. There's a difference. Fixing implies that something is damaged beyond being worthy as it is. Seeing means recognizing the beauty, even in the places that carry pain, and you don't need someone to come and rebuild you from the ground up. You need someone who can stand beside you and understand the story you carry. Without trying to rewrite it, the right heart doesn't rush to change you. It doesn't come with expectations of who you should become. It doesn't pressure you to heal faster, to feel less, to love differently. It simply meets you where you are, and stays. And that kind of presence, it does something deeper than fixing ever could. It allows you to breathe again, because, for so long, you felt like you had to adjust yourself to be loved. You felt like you had to prove that you were worth staying for. You felt like you had to hide the parts of you that were a little heavier, a little more emotional, a little more real. Just so someone wouldn't walk away. But the right heart doesn't make you feel like that. It doesn't make you perform for love. It doesn't make you earn something that should come naturally. It doesn't make you feel like you're one mistake away from being misunderstood again. Instead, it gives you space to exist as you are, fully, openly, honestly, and in that space, something inside you begins to change. Not because someone fixed you, but because you finally feel safe enough to be yourself without fear. that's what real love does. It doesn't come in and say, "Let me repair you." It comes in and says, "You don't have to hide anymore," and slowly, without force, without pressure, you start healing, not because someone is forcing you to be better, but because you're no longer in a place that keeps hurting you. And that's the kind of healing that lasts, because it comes from within. Supported by someone who sees you clearly, not someone who tries to reshape you into something more convenient. You don't need to be fixed, you never did. What you needed was to be understood in a way that made you feel safe, to open up, without being judged. You needed someone who didn't look at your emotions as problems to solve, but as pieces of you to embrace. Someone who didn't try to silence your depth, but learned how to sit with it. And the right heart, it does that naturally. It listens without interrupting your truth. It holds space for your feelings without trying to minimize them. It stays present, even when things aren't easy to understand right away, because understanding you isn't something that scares them. It's something they choose, and when someone chooses you like that, consistently, you stop feeling like you're too much. You stop questioning your worth. You stop overthinking every word, every emotion, every moment, because you finally feel seen, and being seen, truly seen, is more powerful than being fixed, because when someone tries to fix you, they're focusing on what they think is wrong. But when someone sees you, they're focusing on who you really are, and who you really are was never something that needed to be changed. You are someone who loves deeply. Someone who feels honestly. Someone who doesn't pretend. Doesn't hold back. Doesn't settle for something that isn't real. And yes, that kind of heart can be misunderstood by people who aren't ready for it. But the right heart, it doesn't misunderstand you. It recognizes you, it sees the way you love and doesn't get overwhelmed. It gets closer. It sees your emotions and doesn't label them as too much. It understands where they come from. It sees your depth and doesn't try to simplify it. It embraces it, and in that kind of connection, you don't feel like something that needs to be repaired. You feel like something that's finally been found. You feel like you can let your guard down without worrying about being hurt again. You feel like you can express yourself without fear of being misunderstood. You feel like you can be all that you are without having to apologize for it. That's what the right heart brings into your life. Not perfection, not solutions to every pain you've ever felt, but something much more real, much more lasting, understanding, presence, acceptance, and with those things, you begin to see yourself differently. You begin to realize that you were never the problem, that all those moments where you felt like you were too much were just moments where you were with someone who wasn't enough to understand. And that realization, it frees you, because it takes away the need to change yourself in order to be loved. It reminds you that the kind of love you give, the kind of love you carry, is not something to be fixed or reduced, it's something to be met, and the right heart, it meets you there without trying to turn you into someone else, without trying to quiet the parts of you that feel deeply, without trying to make your love easier to handle. It simply stands with you, sees you, understands you, and in that understanding, you don't feel like you need to be fixed anymore. You just feel like you're finally home.